Bonjour,
Hello,
bonjour. Nous sommes prêts quand vous êtes prêts. Et
je suis
puis,
prête.
Recording in progress.
welcome to the press conference with Minister Joly. Bienvenue à cette conférence de presse avec la ministre Joly. À vous la parole.
Merci tout le monde. Hi everybody, it's a pleasure to see all of you today. I'm now in Washington and I'm here to implement the plan that I've talked to you about many times and I reiterated at the beginning of the week, which is essentially working on preventing tariffs, which is our main objective, and also working on our response. So in that context, I had two important meetings today. The first one being Kevin Cramer, who's a senator from North Dakota on the Republican side, and he's the co-chair of the Canada-U.S. Economy and Security Caucus. So we had a good conversation with him, and also I had a very good meeting as well with Marco Rubio, the new Secretary of State. In both cases, we talked about first, our border plan and what we're doing to implement it. And we also talked, of course, about our trade relationship and how imposing tariffs would actually hurt Canadians and Americans on both sides of the border. And I also made clear that should tariffs be imposed, we would retaliate, and everything was on the table. Along with these topics, I also talked with the Secretary of State Rubio about many different issues, including, of course, Ukraine, the Middle East, the Arctic, China, and the Indo-Pacific, the Middle East, and also what's happening in Congo right now. So I will be able to answer any of your questions. Maintenant, laissez-moi juste présenter en français. Donc, je suis à Washington présentement. J'ai eu l'occasion de rencontrer deux personnes clés du côté du Sénat et aussi de l'administration américaine. Mon but ici, c'est vraiment de continuer à mettre en œuvre notre plan qui a deux objectifs. Le premier, c'est de prévenir les tarifs et c'est toujours notre objectif principal. Et le deuxième, c'est préparer la réponse si jamais il y avait des tarifs qui étaient imposés. J'ai rencontré donc Kevin Cramer, qui est un sénateur républicain du Dakota du Nord, qui est le coprésident du caucus canado-américain sur l'économie et la sécurité. Et j'ai également rencontré Marco Rubio, le nouveau secrétaire d'État américain. Dans les deux cas, j'ai parlé de la question, bien entendu, des frontières, de notre plan pour la frontière canado-américaine et de sa mise en œuvre. Et j'ai également parlé de notre relation commerciale en mettant l'accent sur le fait que si jamais les tarifs étaient imposés, bien entendu, ça nuirait certainement aux Canadiens et aux Américains des deux côtés de la frontière. Et si jamais ces tarifs-là étaient imposés, à ce moment-là, le Canada n'aurait aucun autre choix que d'offrir une réponse robuste. Et donc, par conséquent, tout était sur la table. Avec le secrétaire d'État américain, j'ai également parlé de l'Ukraine, du Moyen-Orient, de la Chine, de ce qui se passe aussi dans l'Indo-Pacifique, en Arctique, et nous avons couvert aussi ce qui se passe présentement au Congo. Donc, voilà, ça me fait plaisir de répondre à toutes vos questions.
Thank you, merci. We'll now start the question period. Nous allons maintenant commencer la période de questions. As a reminder, one question, one follow-up. Une question de suivi. Nous allons commencer par Christian Noël. Go ahead.
Bonjour, Madame la ministre. Merci de prendre nos questions.
Pardon, bonjour, Christian. Ça me fait plaisir. Merci.
Merci. Oui, c'est vous. Je pensais que c'est moi qui étais sur mute.
Non, c'est moi.
Je me demandais, pensez-vous avoir réussi à convaincre l'administration Trump? On a réglé la question de la frontière et sortez-vous rassurés qu'on va éviter une première vague de tarifs?
C'était vraiment une rencontre très positive, puis je pense que c'est une relation sur laquelle on peut bâtir. C'était un premier bon contact officiel parce que j'avais déjà eu une rencontre au mois de décembre de façon privée avec Marco Rubio. Je vous dirais que, encore et toujours, on sait ultimement que c'est le président qui va prendre la décision. Mon boulot présentement est de travailler à parler de notre plan sur la frontière, à convaincre aussi à quel point cette frontière-là elle est sécuritaire. Mais aussi, on doit en faire plus ensemble et c'est exactement ce que nous faisons. C'est pour ça que notre plan sur la frontière de 1,3 milliard de dollars a beaucoup d'impact, est en train d'être mis en œuvre rapidement. Et ultimement, que ça peut être une relation gagnant-gagnant. Et sincèrement, ce que j'entends ici à Washington, c'est que ça résonne.
En même temps, M. Trump respecte aussi la fermeté. Comment avez-vous passé le message de la fermeté canadienne à M. Rubio?
Bien, la fermeté canadienne, c'est premièrement, à partir du moment où le président Trump a référé à 25 de tarifs liés au problème de fentanyl à la frontière, nous avons agi. Nous avons agi en l'espace de 15 jours. Et nous avons présenté un plan qui était robuste, un plan aussi qui faisait en sorte de protéger nos propres intérêts. Pourquoi? Parce que, et ça je l'ai mentionné à Marco Rubio, le secrétaire d'État, on sait qu'on a un problème d'armes à feu illégales qui proviennent des États-Unis. On sait aussi qu'on est préoccupé par le fait qu'il pourrait y avoir un flot de migrants illégaux qui proviennent des États-Unis. Donc, de notre côté, on rappelle toujours les faits. Les faits, c'est que, premièrement, moins de 1 du fentanyl qui est aux États-Unis provient du Canada et moins de 1 des immigrants illégaux qui sont aux États-Unis proviennent du Canada. Et donc, lorsqu'on s'attarde aux faits, lorsqu'on met l'accent aussi sur ce qu'on fait, donc les actions qu'on met en place et les impacts de ces actions-là, je pense qu'on a une très bonne crédibilité. Mais, comme je vous dis, il y a un niveau de prévisibilité qui est lié à cette administration-là. Les pouvoirs sont entre les mains du président Trump et donc, il faut être prêt à tout. Et donc, notre fermeté, c'est aussi de répondre à des tarifs et avoir une réponse robuste. Et ça aussi, ce message-là passe.
Merci. Next question, Dylan Robertson.
Hi, Minister. Thanks so much for taking our questions. I'm wondering what your response is to Lutnick's suggestion that these border tariffs are just phase one, and do you also think that Canada has done enough to appease the immediate threat in front of us?
Well, when it comes to the comments of the future Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, I think his comments regarding the fact that we were addressing the border issue and fentanyl were positive. Of course, we need to make sure that we continue to have conversations with him, and we need to continue to have conversations with Tom Homan, who is the border czar, and ultimately make our case to so many key Republicans that are working here on the Hill in Washington. And I must say that every time I'm presenting our border plan, every time I'm presenting facts, which are first, less than 1% of fentanyl that is in the US comes from Canada, and less than 1% of illegal migrants in the US come from Canada. Well, that is definitely also resonating. So I think that we have a good strategy, and we are willing to make sure that this is a win-win partnership. And in that sense, we are making sure also that at the officials level, so at the RCMP level, at the CBSA level, we're making the contacts to clearly show what we're doing.
Thank you. And Minister, I also have an article out today on Carolyn Bennett's appointment as ambassador to Denmark. We have emails from a Freedom of Information request showing that the Privy Council had pushed our diplomats in Copenhagen to expedite her agrément as ambassador. The Bloc Québécois says that this is repeated political interference in senior appointments to the Foreign Service. And I just wanted to get your response to that.
I'm not aware of that information. Actually, Dylan, this is the first time I heard about it was when I read your article this morning. But fundamentally, making sure that we follow up on agréments around the world is something that is very, very typical to what we do at Foreign Affairs, at Global Affairs Canada. And we receive a lot of requests coming in from different countries to speed up agreements for their own also ambassadors to Canada. So this is, I must say, without having specific knowledge about the issue of Ambassador Bennett, something that is a part of our everyday job. Meanwhile, I think it's really important right now that we have a close relationship with Denmark and that we have somebody that is very knowledgeable and very professional. Because of course, as we know, our ambassador to Denmark is also in charge of dealing what is happening when it comes to Greenland, and definitely being Arctic states, Denmark and Canada, we've had numerous conversations over the past months. Denmark was closely involved in the crafting of our Arctic foreign policy. The foreign minister from Denmark was in Iqaluit for the first time ever in September. I met with him also many times to talk about Arctic security, and we want to do more together.
Thank you. Next question, David Aiken.
Good afternoon. Good evening, Minister. Thanks for taking our questions.
David.
I listened carefully to you on Monday, and it was my impression, correct me if I'm wrong, that you did seem hopeful that diplomacy could work in this case. And that's, of course, one of the reasons you're there. You've now had a meeting with Minister Rubio, or Secretary Rubio, and I wonder if you'd give us your sense again about whether it's a bit of a brighter day or a darker day so far as avoiding tariffs.
So I'm an optimistic person, and I think that this was a very positive meeting, and this is a relationship we can really build on, David. And I think that Secretary Rubio is somebody that is extremely knowledgeable, very much respected in Washington by his former colleagues in the Senate, but also by the president himself. At the same time, I'm a very pragmatic person, and I don't expect my counterparts to know everything about our own reality. So my job is ultimately to make sure that they get the facts and that we are able to get time with them to plead their case. And as a former lawyer, my job is to make sure that I plead Canada's case. And so I think that the job that we're doing right now is extremely important. I think that the relationship between Canada and the U.S. is extremely deep, and any form of trade tensions or trade war would have deep and lasting impacts. And so in that sense, I think that doing the job of helping my American colleagues to understand what would be at stake is something that is definitely resonating. Now, am I in the headspace of President Trump? No, of course not. And so in that sense, I'm just doing the job of making sure that people around him really are able to sign on our different arguments.
And as a follow-up, you've kind of segued right into the headspace of President Trump.
Mm-hmm.
So today, as others referenced, nominee for Commerce Secretary Lutnick said it's fentanyl. You do something about fentanyl, and the border, you'll avoid the tariffs. But yes, I know you're aware that we've heard President Trump say, Canada, we have a trade subsidy. We subsidize Canada. It's really about a trade deficit. And there's been any number of things that the president has cited as a reason for tariffs. So, and you're not the only one. I'm confused. We've heard this from business people, everybody. So after your meeting with Secretary Rubio, did Secretary Rubio provide any clarity then about the way Canada can avoid tariffs? Is it fentanyl? Is it a trade subsidy? Does he know?
I think that's a fair question that you're asking. But my job ultimately is to make sure that we address the two issues that President Trump has raised, which is first and foremost, the border and fentanyl. And we have too many deaths in Canada that are linked to fentanyl. This is a national security crisis in our own country. And that's why also we need to make sure that we don't allow any form of fentanyl to come through our border, including through the US. So that's why we came up with the fact that we needed a border plan to address this issue. Less than 1% of the fentanyl in the US is coming from Canada. So that's why we're proposing a joint strike force on fentanyl to make sure that ultimately this issue is addressed. And we're putting all the resources, the boots on the ground, the Black Hawks, the helicopters, the drones, everything at the border to secure the border. So we are now not only talking about our plan, but we're talking about the impacts of the outcomes of our plan. And when I was at Mar-a-Lago with Howard Lutnick and Dominic LeBlanc and also Doug Burgum, we talked about how it was important for us to show the outcomes of our plan. So that's what we're doing. And I know that David McGuinty, the Minister of Public Safety, and I will have more conversation this week until Friday on this very issue. On the question of our trade relationship, I think that number speaks for themselves. Essentially, when you look at it, the US has a trade surplus on manufacturing with us. And what President Trump is really concerned about is actually also the fact that manufacturing jobs need to be able to stay in the US. It's the case when it comes to Canada, because ultimately we're there to work with them to make sure that the 8 million jobs linked to the relationship between Canada and US are protected. Now, if we look at the reality of the trade deficit that the US has with us because they are asking more of our energy, well, the reality is they get our oil at discount. And if they don't get oil from us, they get it from Venezuela. And we know also that the Americans don't want to have any form of dealings with Venezuela. So ultimately, we can find ways to get through this, the importance of our trade relationship to be stable, to make sure ultimately that the Americans can feel and that we can feel that this is a win-win relationship. And that's why I'm really working a lot the hell in Washington. And I must say we have a lot of allies.
Thank you. Next question, Stephanie Taylor.
Hi, Minister. Thanks for your time. I just want to clarify, what did Senator Rubio have to say about Canada's border plan, or Secretary Rubio have to say about Canada's border plan?
Well, first, he was aware that we had a plan. He was aware that it was important for us to work on the fentanyl crisis. And then I exposed everything that was part of our plan. And so he thought that these were positive steps. And ultimately, we need to do more together. And so we've committed together to make sure that our officials would be working on this, and that he would take that information and talk to the president about it, and also that I would continue, and the Minister of Public Safety, David McGuinty, would continue to talk to Tom Homan, the border czar, of President Trump. I think what is important also for you to understand, Stephanie, and for those watching us right now, is the Secretary of State understands the relationship between trade and geopolitics. And it is important that we work together and that we not be divided in a world where there's so many geopolitical competition, particularly when it comes to China.
What makes you think that the facts you are laying out to officials like Secretary Rubio or other Republican lawmakers on the fact that less than 1% of the fentanyl entering the US comes from Canada is sinking in? Like, what makes you think that that is sinking in? And do you have any assurances that Secretary Rubio accepts that fact?
Well, it is a fact. It is based also on the information that we share with the Americans at the border, and that our long-standing cooperation in terms of law enforcement brings to the table. So my point to Rubio was to make sure that we can continue to address this issue. It's not a one-time issue. We need to work on the fentanyl crisis in Canada, in the US through the border plan, but also, Stephanie, what was important is we need to address this with China, because the precursors actually come from China. So that was also the part of linking it to what is happening in the world and not only linked to our bilateral relationship.
Thank you. I'm told that this would be the last question. So the next question will be, the last question will be Katie Simpson. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for taking my question.
Pleasure.
Did Marco Rubio give you any definitive information to say whether tariffs are actually happening on Saturday?
So I think that we need to continue to engage. Like I said, Katie, and your colleagues asked me that question a bit indirectly. The ultimate decision maker is President Trump. So I'm staying until Friday here in Washington, making sure that I'm meeting as many people as possible. And we're working as a Team Canada approach, and we will have also other ministers coming also this week.
So I guess my question is, at this point, less than a week out from a possible massive tariff, no one really knows if Trump has made up his mind either way.
Well, I must say, Katie, that this is just the reality of dealing with the Trump administration, and we need to make sure that we're ready to deal with that unpredictability. But I also think that what we're establishing right now is clear lines of contacts, conversations, being able to present what we're doing, to address their concerns. And I'm cautiously optimistic. But meanwhile, like I've mentioned many, many times, while we're doing that work, we're also ready to retaliate should they decide to impose unfair tariffs against Canadians.
Thank you. And this will be the last question. Mike Bunchfield, go ahead. Mike, do you hear us?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yep.
We can.
Great. Hi, Minister. Thanks for your time tonight.
Pleasure.
You've described yourself as a hawk in the past, and you've talked a lot about border security and fentanyl and all of that. But every time Donald Trump talks about NATO, he talks about how Canada needs to do more. Are you hearing that from? Did you hear that today from Secretary of State Rubio? And does Canada have an answer for him that Canadians haven't already heard?
Well, I definitely think that we have a good plan when it comes to investing in defense, but I think we need to do more, and we need to do more quicker. That's my point. That being said, we need to do it for us, because as foreign minister, I'm seeing how much things are shifting around the world, that geopolitics is definitely creating much more of a security issue for all our countries, and that's why we need to make sure that we're there to protect Canadians. When it comes to our defense partnership, we were able to talk about it, particularly when it comes to working together in the Indo-Pacific. Meanwhile, as for clear issues linked to defense spending, this issue was not raised.
Okay. Do you think Canada needs to do more in the Arctic? Have you heard that in your many, many meetings and trips down to DC? I mean, it's closer to home than the Indo-Pacific, albeit that's important.
Well, when it comes to the Arctic, I think the reaction is unanimous here. They're really happy with our new Arctic foreign policy. They're happy that we are doing more in the Arctic. They expect us to actually do that work. And as I mentioned when I launched the Arctic foreign policy, China and Russia are working together in the Arctic and are increasing their cooperation. So we need to make sure that ultimately we're there to protect our sovereignty, and we're there also working with the U.S. and our Arctic allies, which are the Nordic 5, so Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, and Norway, which are all now all part of NATO, to ultimately affirm our partnership and protect our people. And I think that is very different from what Canada's position used to be, which is ultimately not to talk about NATO or not to talk about other types of partnerships in the Arctic, because for a long, long time, the Arctic was seen as high north, low tension. But at this point, we know that things have changed, geopolitics have shifted, and therefore we need closer cooperation amongst NATO allies in the Arctic.
Thank you. This is all the time we have for with the minister. Merci.
Thank you, guys. Merci beaucoup.